The royal morning preparations. The sun barely peeked through the heavy curtains of Kensington Palace when Princess Kate opened her eyes. Today was different from any other day in her life. The coronation of King Charles III would mark a new chapter for the entire royal family, and she knew the world would be watching every move they made. Kate stretched gently and looked at the clock on her bedside table. It was 5 a.m, much earlier than usual, but sleep had been difficult. Her mind kept racing with thoughts about the ceremony, the children's behavior, and the thousands of people who would line the streets of London to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Prince William was already awake, sitting by the window with a cup of tea in his hands. He had been up since 4, going over the schedule one more time. The responsibility of representing the monarchy weighed heavily on his shoulders, especially on such an important day. He turned to Kate with a gentle smile. "Good morning, darling. Ready for the biggest day of our lives?" he asked softly, trying to keep his voice light despite the nervous energy he felt inside. Kate sat up and ran her fingers through her hair. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this. I keep thinking about the children and how they'll handle all the attention and ceremony." Down the hallway, the sound of little feet running across the wooden floor could be heard. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis were already awake, their excitement bubbling over despite the early hour. The palace staff had prepared special breakfast trays for the children, knowing they would need extra energy for the long day ahead. George, now 10 years old, understood the importance of the day better than his younger siblings. He had been practicing his royal wave and proper posture for weeks. Charlotte, 8 years old and always full of energy, was thrilled about wearing her special dress and seeing all the fancy carriages. 5-year-old Louis was mostly excited about the horses and the soldiers in their bright red uniforms. Kate made her way to the children's rooms, where chaos was already beginning to unfold. Louis had somehow managed to get toothpaste in his hair, while Charlotte was trying to help him clean up. George was standing perfectly still, already dressed in his formal outfit, looking like a miniature version of his father. "Mommy, Louis made a mess," Charlotte announced, pointing at her little brother who was giggling uncontrollably. Kate couldn't help but laugh. No matter how important the day was, her children were still just children, and that brought her a sense of normalcy in the midst of all the royal protocol and ceremony. The palace was buzzing with activity. Dress designers, hairstylists, and makeup artists had arrived before dawn to begin the careful process of preparing the royal family for their public appearance. Every detail had to be perfect, from the color of Kate's lipstick to the way William's medals were positioned on his uniform. Kate's dress had been designed specifically for this occasion. It was elegant but not too flashy, respectful of the solemn ceremony while still showing her personal style. The deep blue color complemented her eyes and represented both tradition and modernity. Her jewelry had been carefully chosen from the royal collection, pieces that had history and meaning. William put on his ceremonial uniform, the same one he had worn for his own wedding years ago. The medals and decorations told the story of his service and dedication to the country. He looked in the mirror and saw not just himself, but generations of royals who had worn similar uniforms to important state occasions. The breakfast room was filled with nervous energy as the family gathered for a quick meal. The children were too excited to eat much, picking at their toast and fruit while asking endless questions about what would happen during the ceremony. "Will there be a real crown, Daddy?" Louis asked, his eyes wide with wonder. "Yes, there will be several real crowns today," William replied, ruffling his youngest son's hair, "and you'll get to see them all up close." Charlotte wanted to know if she could wave to the people on the streets, while George asked serious questions about the order of procession and when they would arrive at Westminster Abbey. Kate answered their questions patiently while keeping an eye on the clock, knowing they needed to leave soon. The final preparations were intense but organized. Kate's hair was styled into an elegant updo that would work perfectly with her hat. Her makeup was applied with careful precision, knowing that cameras would capture every angle throughout the day. The children were given final touch-ups, their hair combed and their clothes adjusted. Security teams were already in position around the palace and along the route to Westminster Abbey. Every possible detail had been planned and rehearsed multiple times. The cars were inspected and ready, the drivers briefed on the exact timing and route. As the family gathered in the main entrance hall of Kensington Palace, There was a moment of quiet before the storm of public attention they were about to face. Kate looked at her husband and children, feeling a mixture of pride, nervousness, and excitement. The palace doors opened and they could hear the distant sound of crowds already gathering on the streets of London. Today would be a day that would be remembered in history books, and they were about to play a central role in that history. William took Kate's hand and squeezed it gently. "Whatever happens today, we're in this together," he whispered. Kate nodded, straightening her shoulders and taking a deep breath. The morning preparations were complete, and it was time to step into their public roles as senior members of the royal family on one of the most important days in recent British history. The journey begins. The black cars waited outside Kensington Palace like sleeping giants, their polished surfaces reflecting the morning light. Security officers stood at attention, their eyes constantly scanning the surroundings. Everything had been checked and double-checked, from the route to the timing to the backup plans that hopefully wouldn't be needed. Prince William helped his family into their designated vehicle, making sure the children were comfortable and secure. Princess Kate settled into her seat, smoothing her dress carefully to avoid wrinkles. She had been through many public events before, but nothing quite like this coronation ceremony. "Remember what we practiced," William said quietly to the children as they buckled their seatbelts. "Wave gently, smile at the people, and stay close to Mummy and Daddy." Prince George nodded seriously, understanding his role as the eldest. Princess Charlotte bounced slightly in her seat with excitement, while Prince Louis pressed his face against the window, already fascinated by the police motorcycles that would escort them through London. As the convoy began to move, Kate felt her heart rate increase. Through the tinted windows, she could already see people lining the streets, some holding British flags, others with cameras and phones ready to capture the historic moment. The crowds grew thicker as they moved closer to central London. The children's excitement was contagious. Charlotte pointed out everything she saw through the window, from the decorated buildings to the people in fancy hats. Louis waved enthusiastically at everyone, not understanding that they couldn't see him through the dark glass but enjoying himself anyway. "Look at all the people," Charlotte exclaimed, pressing her nose to the window. "There are so many of them." William and Kate exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. The responsibility of representing these people, of being worthy of their respect and support, was something they never took lightly. Every public appearance was a chance to connect with the citizens they served. The streets of London had been transformed for the coronation. Union Jack flags hung from every lamppost and building. Barriers lined the roads to keep the crowds organized and safe. Police officers were positioned at regular intervals, their presence both protective and reassuring. As they traveled through different neighborhoods, the family could see the diversity of people who had come to witness this historic day. Families with young children, elderly couples who remembered the last coronation decades ago, tourists from around the world, and locals who had never seen anything quite like this in their lifetimes. Kate watched the crowds with a mixture of awe and responsibility. These people had woken up early, traveled from far distances, and waited for hours just to catch a glimpse of the royal family. Some had slept overnight on the streets to secure the best viewing spots. Their dedication was both humbling and inspiring. "Mummy, why are all these people here?" Louis asked, his 5-year-old mind trying to understand the significance of what was happening. "They're here because today is very special," Kate explained patiently. "Grandpa Charles is becoming king, and they want to be part of this important day in our country's history." The journey gave the family a few precious moments of privacy before they would be in the public eye for hours. William reviewed the ceremony details one more time with Kate, making sure they both understood when to stand, when to bow, and when to participate in the various parts of the service. George asked intelligent questions about the history of coronations and why Westminster Abbey was chosen for such an important ceremony. His parents were proud of his curiosity and his understanding of the traditions they were part of. Even at 10 years old, he showed signs of the future king he would one day become. The convoy made its way through the heart of London, passing iconic landmarks that the children had seen many times before, but never from the perspective of a coronation procession. Big Ben towered in the distance, the Thames sparkled in the morning sun, and the ancient buildings of Westminster came into view. Charlotte entertained herself by making up stories about the people in the crowds. She imagined where they came from, what their lives were like, and why they had chosen to spend their day watching the royal family. Her creativity and compassion reminded Kate of herself at that age, always wondering about other people's lives and experiences. The final approach to Westminster Abbey was the most overwhelming part of the journey. The crowds here were dense and energetic, with people cheering and waving flags as the royal convoy passed by. The children could hear the noise even through the car's soundproofing, and their excitement reached new levels. Kate took deep breaths, preparing herself for the moment when the car doors would open and they would step into the public spotlight. She thought about all the women who had walked into Westminster Abbey before her for coronations, royal weddings, and state funerals. She was about to become part of that long line of history. William reached over and took her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. He knew that despite all her experience with public events, today was different. Today would be remembered and talked about for generations. Today their children would see their grandfather crowned King of England. The car began to slow as they approached their destination. Security teams were already in position around the Abbey, and other members of the royal family were arriving at the same time. The coordination required for such an event was incredible, with every detail planned down to the minute. Through the windows, they could see the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey, a building that had witnessed over 1,000 years of British history. Kings and queens had been crowned within those walls, royal weddings had taken place there, and countless important ceremonies had marked the passage of time and the continuity of the monarchy. As the convoy came to a final stop, the family prepared themselves for the transition from private people to public figures. In a few moments, they would step out of the car and into their roles as senior members of the royal family at one of the most important ceremonies in recent British history. The journey from Kensington Palace to Westminster Abbey was complete, but the real adventure was just beginning. Stepping into history, the moment the car door opened, the world changed completely. The muffled sounds of the crowd suddenly became a roar of excitement that seemed to shake the very air around Westminster Abbey. Camera flashes created a constant sparkle like stars in daylight, and the energy of thousands of people pressed against the barriers was almost overwhelming. Prince William stepped out first, his tall frame immediately recognizable to the crowd. The cheers grew louder as he turned to help Princess Kate out of the vehicle. Her elegant blue dress caught the morning light perfectly, and her composed smile showed years of experience in handling such moments with grace. The children emerged one by one, and the crowd's reaction was immediate and joyful. Princess Charlotte stepped out with confidence, her little hand smoothing her dress just like she had seen her mother do countless times. Prince George followed with the serious expression of a boy who understood the importance of the moment. Prince Louis brought up the rear, his eyes wide with wonder at the spectacle surrounding him. "Wave to the people, darlings," Kate whispered to her children, and they responded beautifully. Charlotte's wave was enthusiastic and natural. George's was measured and princely, and Louis' was so animated that several people in the front row burst into laughter and applause. The family stood together for a moment outside the Abbey, allowing the photographers and film crews to capture the historic arrival. Kate's hand rested gently on Charlotte's shoulder while William placed his hand on George's back. Louis stood close to his mother, occasionally reaching up to hold her hand when the noise and excitement became too much. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey rose before them like a gateway to history. This building had seen the coronation of every British monarch for nearly 1,000 years. The same doors they were about to walk through had been crossed by kings and queens, prime ministers and presidents, and countless other figures who had shaped British and world history. Security officers formed a protective but unobtrusive presence around the royal family as they began their walk toward the Abbey entrance. The red carpet beneath their feet had been placed with military precision, and every step was captured by cameras from around the world. Kate could hear individual voices in the crowd calling out their names and good wishes. "Good luck, William."
"You look beautiful, Kate." "Hello, Charlotte."
The personal connection with the people who had come to witness this historic day was one of the most meaningful aspects of royal duty. Charlotte whispered something to her mother that made Kate smile genuinely, a moment of natural family interaction that the cameras captured, and that would be remembered as one of the most heartwarming images of the day. George walked with the posture and dignity of someone much older than his 10 years. While Louis occasionally skipped a step or two, his childhood energy impossible to contain completely. As they approached the great doors of the abbey, the sound of the organ could be heard from within. The ceremony was about to begin, and inside hundreds of distinguished guests from around the world were waiting. Presidents, prime ministers, other members of royal families, religious leaders, and representatives from every corner of the Commonwealth were already seated. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood at the entrance, ready to greet the royal family before they took their places for the coronation ceremony. His robes were magnificent, representing centuries of tradition and the sacred nature of the ceremony they were all about to witness. William paused at the threshold and looked back at his family. This was a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. His children were about to witness their grandfather become king, an event that would shape their understanding of their own roles in the monarchy for years to come. Kate took a deep breath of the cool morning air before stepping into the abbey. Inside, the atmosphere would be different, more solemn, more ceremonial, more weighted with the significance of the occasion. But here, outside, there was still a connection to the ordinary people who made up the heart of the nation. The crowds continued to cheer as the family moved closer to the entrance. People held up their phones and cameras, trying to capture every moment of this historic day. Children sat on their parents' shoulders for a better view. Elderly people wiped tears from their eyes, and visitors from other countries marveled at the pageantry and tradition they were witnessing. Louis turned around one more time to wave at the crowd, his innocent enthusiasm bringing smiles to thousands of faces. Charlotte gave a particularly elegant wave that showed she had been paying attention to all those etiquette lessons. George maintained his composure while still acknowledging the people who had come to show their support. The moment of transition from the outside world to the sacred space of the abbey was profound. As they crossed the threshold, the family moved from the realm of public celebration into the ancient ritual that would crown a new king. The noise of the crowd faded behind them, replaced by the solemn beauty of one of England's most sacred spaces. Inside the abbey, the lighting was softer, filtered through stained glass windows that had witnessed centuries of history. The air was filled with the scent of flowers and the reverent anticipation of hundreds of guests who represented the best of British society and the wider world. Kate helped the children navigate the transition from the excitement outside to the more formal atmosphere inside. She whispered quiet reminders about behavior and posture, but she was proud of how well they were handling such an overwhelming experience. William looked around the abbey, seeing not just the beautiful architecture and the distinguished guests, but the weight of history and tradition that surrounded them. In a few minutes, his father would be crowned King Charles III, and the family would take their places in a ceremony that connected them to 1,000 years of British history. The great doors of Westminster Abbey closed behind them, shutting out the cheers of the crowd but not the significance of what they represented. They had successfully made the journey from private family to public symbols, and now they were ready to take their places in one of the most important ceremonies in recent British history. Inside the sacred abbey, the interior of Westminster Abbey was breathtaking in its grandeur and solemnity. Centuries-old stone arches reached toward heaven, and the morning light streaming through ancient stained glass windows painted rainbow patterns across the gathered congregation. The atmosphere was thick with reverence and anticipation as nearly 2,000 guests waited for the coronation ceremony to begin. Princess Kate guided her children down the aisle, their footsteps echoing softly on the stone floor that had been walked by countless monarchs throughout British history. The children's eyes were wide as they took in the magnificent surroundings. Prince Louis held tightly to his mother's hand, while Princess Charlotte walked with careful steps, remembering all her lessons about proper royal behavior. Prince George looked around with the serious expression of a boy who understood he was witnessing something extraordinary. The abbey was filled with people he recognized from television and official portraits, prime ministers, presidents, and other members of royal families from around the world. Everyone was dressed in their finest ceremonial clothing, creating a sea of elegant colors and sparkling jewels. The family made their way to their designated seats in the front section of the abbey, positioned where they would have a perfect view of the coronation ceremony while also being visible to the cameras that were broadcasting this historic event to millions of people around the world. As they settled into their seats, Kate whispered gentle reminders to the children about sitting still and paying attention. The ceremony would be long, and she knew that keeping 3 young children, focused and well-behaved for several hours, would be one of her biggest challenges of the day. The organ music that had been playing softly in the background began to swell, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. A hush fell over the congregation as everyone prepared to witness the ancient ritual of coronation that had been performed in this same abbey for nearly 1,000 years. King Charles III would soon enter the abbey, beginning his journey to the throne that he had been preparing for his entire life. The weight of tradition and responsibility that came with the crown was something that every member of the royal family understood, but today it would become more real than ever before. Charlotte looked around at all the fancy hats and elaborate outfits worn by the other guests. She whispered to her mother about a particularly spectacular feathered creation, making Kate smile despite the solemn nature of the occasion. These small moments of childhood wonder helped keep the day feeling human and personal, even in the midst of such grand ceremony. Louis was fascinated by the soldiers in their bright red uniforms who stood at attention throughout the abbey. He had seen guards at the palaces before, but never so many in such a magnificent setting. His eyes followed their every movement, and he whispered questions to his father about their weapons and ceremonies. George sat with perfect posture, his hands folded in his lap as he had been taught. He understood that cameras were capturing every moment, and that people around the world would see how the royal family behaved during this important ceremony. The responsibility of representing the monarchy well was something he felt even at his young age. The distinguished guests included heads of state from dozens of countries, representing the global reach and influence of the British monarchy. The Commonwealth nations were particularly well represented, showing the connections that bound together countries across multiple continents through their shared history and values. Religious leaders from various faiths were present, reflecting the modern monarchy's role in serving people of all backgrounds and beliefs. The Archbishop of Canterbury would lead the ceremony, but the presence of other religious figures showed the inclusive nature of contemporary British society. Kate noticed how the light continued to change throughout the abbey as the sun moved higher in the sky. The stained glass windows told stories of saints and biblical scenes, their colors becoming more vibrant as the morning progressed. The beauty of the setting added to the spiritual significance of what they were about to witness. The children had been prepared for this moment through weeks of explanation and practice, but being inside the abbey during the actual ceremony was different from anything they could have imagined. The combination of visual splendor, musical beauty, and historical significance created an atmosphere unlike anywhere else in the world. William looked around at the gathering and felt the profound responsibility that came with being part of this ancient institution. Every person in the abbey was there because of their connection to the monarchy, whether through government service, diplomatic relations, or cultural contributions to British society. The flowers decorating the abbey had been chosen with care, their colors and arrangements reflecting both the season and the significance of the occasion. The scent of roses and other blooms added another layer of sensory experience to the ceremony, connecting the present moment to countless previous coronations that had taken place in this same sacred space. Charlotte asked her mother in a whisper why everyone was dressed so formally, and Kate explained that this was one of the most important days in their country's history. People had traveled from around the world to be present for this ceremony, and wearing their finest clothing was a way of showing respect for the occasion and for the new king. The acoustics of the abbey were perfect for the music and prayers that would soon fill the space. Every word spoken and every note sung would be heard clearly by everyone present, creating a shared experience that would bind together all the witnesses to this historic moment. As the final preparations were made for the ceremony to begin, the family sat together in quiet anticipation. They were part of something much larger than themselves and a tradition that stretched back through centuries of British history and would continue long after they were gone. The ancient stones of Westminster Abbey had witnessed the coronations of 39 previous monarchs. Today, those same walls would see the crowning of King Charles III, and Prince William, Princess Kate, and their children would be witnesses to history in the making. The moment was approaching when the ceremony would officially begin, transforming their father and grandfather from heir to the throne into the crowned King of England and the Commonwealth realms. The sacred ceremony unfolds the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived, as the great organ of Westminster Abbey began to play the processional music. A profound silence fell over the congregation, broken only by the magnificent sounds echoing through the ancient stone arches. King Charles III was about to enter the Abbey for his coronation ceremony. Princess Kate felt her heart beating faster as she watched the entrance. Knowing that in moments she would see her father-in-law transformed from heir to monarch in a ceremony that connected the present day to 1,000 years of British history, she glanced at her children, making sure they were ready for what was about to unfold. Prince Louis pressed closer to his mother as the music grew louder and more magnificent. The sound seemed to fill every corner of the Abbey, and he could feel the vibrations in his chest. Princess Charlotte sat up straighter, her eyes fixed on the entrance where she knew Grandpa Charles would soon appear. The procession began with church officials and members of the royal household, their colorful robes and ceremonial regalia creating a moving tapestry of tradition and pageantry. Each person had a specific role in the ancient ceremony, and their careful movements had been rehearsed many times to ensure everything proceeded with dignity and precision. Prince George watched with fascination as various officials carried items that would be used in the coronation ceremony. The ancient symbols of monarchy, swords, scepters, and other regalia, had been used in coronations for centuries. Seeing them in person made the history lessons he had received come alive in a way that no textbook could achieve. When King Charles III finally entered the Abbey, the sight was truly magnificent. He walked with dignity and purpose, wearing ceremonial robes that sparkled with golden thread and precious stones. The St. Edward's crown, which would soon be placed on his head, was carried ahead of him on a special cushion, its diamonds and sapphires catching the light from the stained glass windows. Kate felt emotional seeing Charles in this moment of supreme importance. She had known him as a father-in-law, a grandfather to her children, and a dedicated public servant. Now she was witnessing his transformation into the monarch who would lead the nation and the Commonwealth for years to come. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood ready at the altar, his voice clear and strong as he began the ancient words of the coronation ceremony. The prayers and ritual responses had been spoken in this same abbey for centuries, connecting this moment to all the kings and queens who had been crowned here before. Charlotte was amazed by all the beautiful music that filled the abbey. The choir sang with voices that seemed to reach toward heaven, and the organ provided a foundation of sound that made her feel like she was inside a living, breathing piece of music. She had never heard anything so beautiful or so powerful. The ceremony proceeded through its various stages, each with deep symbolic meaning. The recognition, where the Archbishop presented Charles to the congregation as their rightful king. The oath, where he promised to govern according to the law and to protect the church. Each step had been part of coronation ceremonies for generations. Louis found some parts of the ceremony difficult to follow, but he was fascinated by all the colorful costumes and shining objects. When the Archbishop held up various pieces of the royal regalia, the little boy whispered questions to his father about what each item was for and why it was important. The most sacred moment of the ceremony approached as King Charles III was prepared for the actual crowning. The St. Edward's crown, made of solid gold and precious stones, was lifted high above his head. The entire abbey held its breath as the Archbishop prepared to place it on the new monarch's head. George understood that this was the most important moment of the entire ceremony. His grandfather was about to become king in the most official and sacred way possible. He sat perfectly still, not wanting to miss a single second of this historic moment. The crown was gently lowered onto King Charles III's head, and in that instant, he was transformed from heir to monarch. The congregation erupted in the traditional cry of, "God save the King," and the moment was complete. After waiting his entire life for this moment, Charles was finally King of England and the Commonwealth realms. Kate felt tears in her eyes as she watched this profound moment. Her children were witnessing their grandfather become king, something that would shape their understanding of their own roles in the monarchy for the rest of their lives. The weight of tradition and the promise of the future came together in this single sacred moment. The music that followed was triumphant and joyful, filling the abbey with sounds of celebration. The ceremony continued with the crowning of Queen Camilla, adding another layer of significance to the day. The children watched with fascination as the queen consort received her own crown and took her place beside the new king. Charlotte was particularly interested in Queen Camilla's crown, which was different from the king's but equally beautiful. She whispered to her mother about the sparkling jewels and the way the light made them look like stars. These moments of wonder helped make the grand ceremony feel personal and meaningful. The final prayers and blessings of the ceremony brought together all the themes of service, duty, and dedication that defined the monarchy. King Charles III and Queen Camilla were now officially crowned, and the gathered congregation prepared for the procession that would take the newly crowned monarchs out of the abbey and back to Buckingham Palace. As the ceremony concluded, the family prepared to leave their seats and join the procession. They had witnessed history being made, and now they would be part of the celebration that would carry the new king and queen through the streets of London to greet the thousands of people who had gathered to share in this historic day. The ancient ceremony was complete, but the celebration was just beginning. The royal procession as the coronation ceremony concluded, the atmosphere inside Westminster Abbey shifted from solemn reverence to joyful celebration. The newly crowned King Charles III and Queen Camilla prepared for their triumphant procession through the streets of London, while the other members of the royal family organized themselves according to the carefully planned order of departure. Princess Kate helped her children stand and smooth their formal clothing, preparing them for the next phase of this historic day. The procession would give the public their first opportunity to see the newly crowned monarchs, and every member of the royal family would play their part in this magnificent display of pageantry and tradition. Prince William guided his family toward their designated position in the procession. Prince George walked with the measured steps he had practiced, understanding that his behavior would be watched and remembered. Princess Charlotte held her head high, excited about the carriage ride and the crowds they would encounter. Prince Louis stayed close to his parents, still amazed by everything he had seen and experienced. The organization of the procession was a masterpiece of planning and coordination. Each carriage, each horse, each rider had been assigned a specific place and role. The procession would move through central London at a pace that allowed the crowds to see the royal family clearly while maintaining the dignity and grandeur appropriate for such a momentous occasion. The newly crowned king and queen would ride in the magnificent Gold State coach, a vehicle that had been used for coronations and other state occasions for over 2 centuries. Its ornate decorations and historical significance made it the perfect choice for carrying the monarchs on their first journey as crowned king and queen. Kate settled into their carriage with the children, making sure everyone was comfortable and properly positioned. The windows would allow them to see the crowds and wave to the people who had gathered to celebrate this historic day. She reminded the children about proper waving technique and the importance of smiling genuinely at the people they would see. As the procession began to move, the sound of horses' hooves on the ancient stones around Westminster Abbey created a rhythmic accompaniment to the cheers of the crowd. The mounted guards in their ceremonial uniforms rode alongside the carriages, their colorful uniforms and perfectly trained horses adding to the spectacle. The first glimpse of the crowds outside the abbey was breathtaking. Thousands of people lined the barriers, many having waited for hours or even overnight to secure the best viewing positions. Union Jack flags waved everywhere, and the sound of cheering created a wall of celebration that seemed to embrace the entire procession. Charlotte pressed her face to the carriage window, amazed by the sea of people stretching as far as she could see. "Mummy, there are so many people," she exclaimed, waving enthusiastically at the crowds who cheered even louder when they saw the royal children. George maintained his composed demeanor, but couldn't help smiling at the infectious enthusiasm of the crowd. He waved with the practiced motion he had learned, acknowledging the people while maintaining the dignity expected of a future king. His serious expression occasionally broke into genuine joy when he saw children his own age waving from the crowd. Louis was completely captivated by the spectacle surrounding them. The horses, the guards, the colorful uniforms, and the cheering crowds created a sensory experience unlike anything he had ever encountered. He waved with both hands, sometimes pressing both palms against the window and grinning at the people outside. The procession route had been carefully chosen to maximize the number of people who could see the newly crowned monarchs while also showcasing some of London's most iconic landmarks. The carriages moved past Big Ben along Whitehall, and through other historic areas that represented the heart of British government and culture. Kate watched the crowds with a mixture of joy and responsibility. These people had come from all over Britain and around the world to witness this historic day. Many had traveled great distances and spent considerable money to be here. Their dedication to the monarchy and their genuine enthusiasm for the celebration was both humbling and inspiring. William pointed out various landmarks to the children as they passed, helping them understand the significance of the route and the buildings they could see. The procession was not just entertainment, but also a lesson in British history and the role of the monarchy in the nation's life. The international media presence was enormous, with television crews and photographers positioned at strategic points along the route. This procession was being watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world, making it one of the most viewed events in recent history. The timing of the procession had been calculated precisely to allow optimal lighting for photography and television coverage while also ensuring that the crowds could see everything clearly. Every detail, from the speed of the horses to the positioning of the carriages, had been planned to create the most magnificent spectacle possible. As they moved through different areas of London, the character of the crowds changed, but the enthusiasm remained constant. Tourists mixed with local residents. Children sat on their parents' shoulders for better views, and elderly people who remembered previous royal occasions watched with tears of joy in their eyes. The sound of church bells could be heard across London as the procession passed, adding another layer of celebration to the day. Churches throughout the city were marking this historic moment with traditional bell ringing, creating a musical backdrop that connected the present celebration to centuries of royal traditions. The children were fascinated by the different reactions they saw in the crowd. Some people were crying with emotion, others were laughing with joy, and many were trying to capture photos and videos to remember this once-in-a-lifetime experience. Charlotte waved particularly enthusiastically at a group of children who were holding a homemade banner with her name on it. The horses pulling the carriages were magnificently trained, moving with perfect precision despite the noise and excitement surrounding them. Louis was amazed by how calm and steady they remained, and he asked his father if he could learn to ride horses like the ceremonial guards they could see throughout the procession. As they approached the final stretch of the route toward Buckingham Palace, the crowds became even denser and more excited. People had been waiting all day for this moment, and the sight of the newly crowned king and queen, followed by the rest of the royal family, created an atmosphere of pure celebration. Kate felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility as she looked out at the thousands of people who had come to share in this historic day. The procession represented more than just pageantry and tradition. It was a connection between the monarchy and the people, a demonstration of the bonds that held the nation together. The magnificent gates of Buckingham Palace came into view, marking the end of the procession route but the beginning of the final celebration of the day. The balcony appearance that would follow would give the crowds one more opportunity to see the newly crowned monarchs and celebrate the beginning of a new era in British history. William looked at his family with satisfaction and pride. They had successfully navigated one of the most important and challenging days in recent royal history, and the children had represented the monarchy with dignity and charm throughout the entire experience. The balcony moment. The golden afternoon sun cast a warm glow over Buckingham Palace as the royal carriages arrived at the end of their magnificent procession through London. The crowds that had followed the route now gathered in front of the palace, their excited voices creating a symphony of celebration that could be heard throughout the surrounding parks and streets. Princess Kate felt a mixture of relief and anticipation as their carriage came to a stop in the palace courtyard. The long day was nearing its climax, and she knew that the balcony appearance would be the moment that people around the world would remember most vividly from King Charles III's coronation day. The children were tired but still excited as they stepped out of the carriage. Prince Louis had dozed briefly during the latter part of the procession, his head resting against his mother's shoulder, but the sound of the cheering crowds quickly brought him back to full alertness. Princess Charlotte smoothed her dress and checked her hair, showing the same attention to appearance that had served her mother so well throughout years of public events. Prince George walked with the measured steps of someone who understood that the most important moment of the day was still ahead. The balcony appearance was a tradition that connected this coronation to all the great royal celebrations of the past, and he felt the weight of that history as they made their way into the palace. Inside Buckingham Palace, the newly crowned King Charles III and Queen Camilla were making final preparations for their first public appearance as crowned monarchs. The St. Edward's crown had been replaced with the lighter imperial state crown, which would be more comfortable for the extended balcony appearance and the photographs that would record this historic moment. The family gathered in the rooms behind the famous balcony, taking a few precious moments to catch their breath and prepare for what many considered the most important part of the entire day. The balcony appearance would give millions of people their clearest view of the newly crowned king and queen, and the images captured would be seen around the world for generations to come. Kate helped the children with final touch-ups to their appearance, making sure their hair was neat and their clothing properly arranged. She knew that photographers with powerful telephoto lenses would capture every detail, and she wanted her family to look their absolute best for this historic moment. The sound of the crowd outside was tremendous, a wall of excitement and anticipation that seemed to shake the very walls of the palace. Thousands of people had gathered in front of Buckingham Palace, many having waited there for hours after, watching the procession pass by on the streets of London. William looked out through the palace windows at the sea of people stretching from the palace gates across St. James's Park and beyond. The sight was both humbling and inspiring, a reminder of the deep connection between the monarchy and the people of Britain and the Commonwealth nations. Charlotte asked her mother if she would be able to see all the people from the balcony, and Kate assured her that the view would be spectacular. The balcony of Buckingham Palace was positioned perfectly to give the royal family a commanding view of the crowds while allowing the people to see them clearly in return. Louis was fascinated by the idea that people all over the world would be watching them on television when they stepped onto the balcony. He had been told that hundreds of millions of people would see him wave, a concept that was almost impossible for a 5-year-old mind to fully comprehend, but exciting nonetheless. The moment arrived when the family was called to take their positions for the balcony appearance. King Charles III and Queen Camilla would stand in the center, with other members of the royal family arranged around them according to protocol and family hierarchy that had been established through generations of royal tradition. As they approached the famous French doors that led to the balcony, the sound of the crowd grew even louder. The people gathered below could somehow sense that the royal family was about to appear, and their excitement reached fever pitch in anticipation of seeing the newly crowned monarchs. The doors opened, and King Charles III stepped onto the balcony first, followed immediately by Queen Camilla. The roar from the crowd was deafening, a sound of pure joy and celebration that seemed to rise up from the very heart of the nation. Union Jack flags waved everywhere, creating a sea of red, white, and blue that stretched as far as the eye could see. Prince William and Princess Kate emerged onto the balcony with their children, and the crowd's excitement reached new heights. The sight of the 3 royal children waving from the famous balcony was particularly moving for many people in the crowd, representing the future of the monarchy and the continuation of traditions that had shaped British life for centuries. George waved with the dignity and composure that had marked his behavior throughout the entire day. Charlotte's wave was more animated and joyful, her natural enthusiasm bringing smiles to thousands of faces in the crowd below. Louis waved with both hands, sometimes jumping slightly with excitement, his uninhibited joy infectious to everyone who could see him. The family stood together on the balcony for several minutes, waving and acknowledging the crowds while photographers captured images that would be published around the world and preserved in history books for future generations. The sight of 4 generations of the royal family together on this historic day was particularly meaningful. Kate looked out at the enormous crowd and felt overwhelmed by the responsibility and privilege of the moment. These people had chosen to spend their day celebrating the monarchy and the coronation of the new king. Their enthusiasm and dedication represented the best of what the royal family could inspire in the nation. The balcony appearance concluded with the traditional RAF flyover, as military aircraft roared overhead in perfect formation, trailing red, white, and blue smoke that painted the sky with the colors of the British flag. The children looked up in wonder at the spectacular aerial display, while the crowd below cheered even louder at this dramatic conclusion to the day's celebrations. As the royal family finally waved their last waves and stepped back into the palace, the coronation day was officially complete. They had successfully navigated one of the most important and challenging days in recent royal history, creating memories that would last their entire lives and representing the monarchy with dignity, grace, and genuine warmth. The echoes of the crowd's cheers continued to drift through the palace windows as the family gathered inside, exhausted but triumphant, knowing they had been part of something truly historic and magnificent.